So the social, the economic, the demographic, the political, the institutional contexts of rural vary widely across all of rural America, complicating how we might approach educational policy and rural educational policy. And speaking of rural diversity, so rural America is marked by significant variation in history, culture, landscapes, economic foundations, and its people. And rurality is often imagined as a white space. And in fact, if you look at the data, rural America as a whole is less diverse than urban America. And this holds true not only for broader populations overall, but also for school populations, and yet patterns of diversity vary considerably by region, state, and locality. So nationwide data obviously can hide significant regional variations in ethnic and racial concentration. So for example, 90% of African Americans living in non-metro areas live in the southern regions of the US. This compares slightly more than 6% in the Midwest and less than 2% in the West. And additionally, 4 states have rural school populations that are more than 50% non-white. So I mentioned that Mayberry was based on Mount Airy, North Carolina, and yet North Carolina now has the 9th largest non-white student population, reflecting demographic shifts that, as we speak, are having some significant impacts on electoral politics and shifts in voting patterns. And while we're talking about rural diversity, if this is something that's of interest to you, let me give a plug to Mara Teakin's new book, Why Rural Schools Matter, and Mara will be talking later on today, so I highly recommend that. And this is a wonderful, wonderful book, both about rural education and school community connections and issues of racial and socioeconomic diversity within rural contexts. So highly recommended. Okay, so furthermore, although rural population growth is slowing, diversity in America, rural and otherwise, is growing. So for example, between 2000 and 2010, minority populations accounted for 83% of the population gain in non-metro America. This rural diversity is particularly pronounced among children. 18% of the rural adult population is minority in comparison with 28% of the child population. 356 non-metro counties now have a rural youth population that's majority minority, and another 178 non-metro counties are near majority minority. So demographers project that in 6 years, whites will be a minority among school-age populations, and by 2042, whites overall will be a minority population. And here is a map showing patterns of non-metropolitan minority child populations as of 2010, and you can see the Black Belt and the areas around the Colonia areas in the Southwest as heavily minority. Arizona, California, Utah, and Nevada all have minority-majority non-metro counties. In short, patterns of racial and ethnic diversity are changing in rural America, and this has real consequences for rural education in terms of changing populations with specific needs such as ESL, and also in thinking about the relationships between spatial inequality and social inequality, and the extent to which changing racial compositions are also accompanied by deepening inequalities and poverty concentration. Okay, so why should we care about rural people and places, rural communities and youth? Why should we care?